Shalom.
Shalom.
Salam.
Salam.
Peace.
Peace.
I'm Rabbi Mark Kula. I'm the rabbi here at Har Shalom. I want to welcome everyone this evening. And Dr. Kia, thank you so much for coming to speak with us. These are challenging times, and it's a blessing to come together as a community. Today happens to be a Jewish holiday, Tu B'Shvat. It's Jewish Earth Day, or the New Year for the trees. And something interesting about the trees, the Talmud discusses how they chose this day. And as in every case in the Talmud, they have a lot of debate. It should have been this day, it should have been that day, to celebrate the beginning of springtime, the end of winter. Well, it's not exactly a particular day, it kind of happens. And they chose this day because the sap begins to rise. And they noticed in historical times that the sap would begin to rise when they would tap a tree, or the sap would come out at this particular time. So it's not that the winter is totally over, nor that the spring has totally begun, but that the sap, life is coming back into the tree after the winter. And that happens inside the tree, and you don't really see it.
Pussy willows are starting up.
What?
The pussy willows
Yes, they are starting up. I've noticed that. And one of the things that we do by learning with experts, people who can really share information, is that we can really get to the inside of matters. It's not just on the surface. So on this holiday of Tu B'Shvat, where we connect to nature, also we connect to wisdom and knowledge. And so with that introduction, I want to call on Mona Bachman to come up and do the introductions. This is a program that is co-sponsored with Har Shalom in Zootown, and I'm really grateful for all the work that Mona's done. I want to give a thank you and a shout out to Mona. Thank you.
Well, it's good to see you all. It's hard to get people out in the evening in winter, but here you are. As Rabbi Mark said, this talk is organized by Har Shalom and Zootown Jews, which is Missoula's community Jewish group. I'm Mona Bachman. I'm the coordinator of Zootown Jews and on the board of Har Shalom as the communications chair. And I'm very happy to be able to introduce Mehrdad Kia tonight. It's a lot of work to be a Jew in Missoula. Unlike in my hometown, New York City, both our Jewish groups were going along organizing the usual assortment of services and reading groups and kids education. And then October 7th happened. And the war and the rise in anti-Semitism has affected us all and in some ways made our work even more essential. We've been involved in many individual and group conversations, both within the Jewish community and also with nonprofits, businesses, and local government bodies who are all grappling with the war and its implications. And we know you all are struggling with this too. So we hope you come back. Those who are new here, join us for some upcoming events. On February 2nd, there's a Shabbat service led by Rabbi Kula, and we always have time to hang out and talk afterwards. On February 12th, Dalit and Aviv and Geffen Gushio are presenting a talk, an informal presentation about their recent trip to Israel, February 12th. Stay tuned for that. There's a lot more happening. Thank you so much to Dr. Kia for graciously agreeing to speak with us, and also thank you to all the other people who've been helping with this, with food, security, at the door. Thank you so much to MCAT for recording the events. This presentation is being recorded by Missoula Community Access Television as part of a media assistance grant donated to Har Shalom and Zootown Jews by MCAT, and the recording will be available as part of MCAT's video library. Mehrdad Kia is professor of history and the founder and director of the University of Montana's Central and Southwest Asian Studies Center. The center brings to Missoula experts from all over the world, organizes conferences and publications, and draws large numbers of students to its interdisciplinary undergraduate, major, and graduate studies. Dr. Kia's research and teaching focus on the history of the Middle East, Central Asia, North Africa, and Islamic civilization. He has studied the intellectual history of 19th century and early 20th century Iran, the Ottoman Empire, the Transcaucasus, and issues of political modernization, socio-economic reform, and the relationship between the Islamic world and the West. His many publications include a 2-volume history of the Ottoman Empire, a 2-volume history of the Persian Empire, a work called The Clash of Empires and the Rise of Kurdish Proto-Nationalism, and he is a co-editor of a much-cited anthology on modern Middle Eastern authoritarianism. Professor Kia's lectures on Islamic civilization draw students from all around the university, as well as history majors and also members of the public. He's won several teaching awards, including the Distinguished Teacher of the Year and the Most Inspirational Teacher of the Year from the University of Montana. And in 2000, the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching honored Professor Kia as one of the U.S. Professors of the Year. You can also hear Dr. Kia on the radio, along with Michael Mayer, on a weekly call-in show called Talkback on KGVO. This has thousands of engaged listeners, and you can join them, and you can catch this on the website for the radio station or YouTube or on various podcast platforms. Talkback with Mehrdad Kia. I don't know Dr. Kia well, but we've been in each other's orbits for a very long time. And knowing that Missoula is a place where, despite all its limitations, Mehrdad Kia and his family can live and work has always made me very happy. And I hope that after you hear this lecture, you will share that feeling.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Mona, first and foremost to you for your very kind introduction and to the invitation extended from Har Shalom and Zootown Jews. And it's really, truly an honor and privilege to be here. I wish that our coming together was on a happier occasion. This follows a very tragic event on October 7th, the invasion, assault, rape, killing, and murder of hundreds of innocent Israelis. And I have tried, together, as Mona correctly mentioned, with my colleague Michael Mayer, to address some of these issues in our public presentations, especially on the radio, answering questions. But this is one more and very important opportunity for me to address them. Let me first clarify a couple things. First and foremost, I think people would always wonder, where is this guy coming from politically? Is he a Democrat? Is he a Republican? Let me disappoint all of you right off the bat and tell you I'm neither a Democrat nor a Republican. I've always loved to be unpredictable and consider myself a very proud, independent-minded analyst. So if you hear anything complimentary or critical of any political leader or any political parties, stay tuned until my attack against the other side or my criticism of the other side comes. To be honest with you, I believe personally, and this is all I would say tonight, at least in this introduction, and then we can get into it in question and answer. I have been very disappointed by both political parties and political leaderships, and more important than all of them, by the ignorance which prevails in Washington about the world and global affairs, and how this ignorance has sometimes resulted into horrible policies, especially with regard to the region that I am studying. As Mona mentioned, Middle East, Central Asia, and North Africa, and the so-called Islamic world. For this presentation, I sort of agonized a little bit, because we have, 35 minutes, 40 minutes, do I go back to history? And I thought, that's a very interesting suggestion, but we're going to get bogged down, and probably I will come to the beginning of the 20th century, and we will be running out of time. So instead of going into history, I thought we sort of focus on the present moment and where we are, and in the immediate sense, how we got here. So a little bit about the political geography of what we are discussing. Of course, we are discussing about the state of Israel. And as most of you know, since after the First World War, this was a territory which was referred to as the British Mandate of Palestine. That is the Ottoman Empire, which ruled this area of the world for nearly 400 years, was defeated. The British had taken over this piece of territory. And of course, through the so-called Balfour Declaration of November 1917, they had made a critical promise of allowing Jewish immigration to settle in Palestine. Jewish immigration, however, had already started back in the 19th century, And under the British rule, it accelerated. But one thing is very important for us to understand historically. This land has never had a moment in its history without a Jewish community. Jewish communities have lived in this land for thousands of years. Of course, ruled this piece of territory. They had kingdoms, they had their own rulers, but as a result of persecutions, attacks, and genocidal attacks, I should say, they were forced into exile, especially the last time after the Romans attacked and defeated them in roughly 70 AD. But under the British, there was an attempt made to never resolve this issue, the issue that the Jewish refugees are coming from Europe, but the land also has a significant Arabic-speaking population. I want to sort of put an end note right off the bat right there, because today we hear about Palestinian Arabs. This concept did not exist in 1920s. I've looked at every document that you can imagine in the British archives and the French archives and whichever archive I could get into. For those of you who are interested in history, I think it's very, very, very timely to look at a document called the King-Crane Commission report. The King and Crane were two members of the US Congress. They actually went to British Palestine. They interviewed a large number of people. And they talked about what the aspirations of the two sides, the Jewish side and the Arab side, both Christian and Muslim. Remember, Palestinians are not just Muslim. There are also a significant population of Christian Palestinians, what they aspire to. And it's very interesting in the conclusion, the King-Crane Commission mentions very clearly that the aspiration of the Arabic-speaking population is to be part of Syria. They consider themselves Syrians, basically. There was no concept of Palestinian Arabs. That concept gradually matured in the 1920s and 30s as there was a sense of being isolated and being leaderless, and a sense of nationalistic sentiments began to emerge, especially in the 1940s. Now, in the 1947, in November of 1947, finally the United Nations took up the issue of Palestine, because the British, after the Second World War, had declared their intention to leave, to withdraw, and they were hoping that by taking the case to the United Nations would ask the British government to stay, and they would fund the British troops in Palestine. The United Nations took its time, went through a very, very careful analysis of the situation, and came back with a solution which to me seemed to be a very rational solution, was a two-state solution, a Jewish state and an Arab state. And of course, it was very disappointing to the British because they had to withdraw then. And it's fascinating to understand that the Jewish side immediately accepted the plan, the November 1947 plan. In fact, one predominantly Islamic country, but non-Arab country, Iran, voted in favor of the plan, but all Arab countries rejected the plan. When one side rejects a peace plan, what is it that they're asking? They're basically arguing that the only solution is war, is conflict. And indeed, as a result of the withdrawal of British troops in May, exactly May 15, 1948, as Israel declared its existence, a few minutes later, President Truman recognized the existence of the Jewish state. Short time later, Soviet Union recognized it, and then 7 Arab states declared war on it. That gives you a sense of what has been the problem from the very beginning. That is, the Arab population, especially in the surrounding countries, never wanted to see a Jewish state called Israel. They refer to it as a colonial settler state, as a British plan, and so on and so forth. And it went all the way to several wars, of course, that we cannot go into. But in 1967, under Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, basically the slogan of Arab nationalists was "throw the Jews into the sea." I mean, that was the motto that was repeated, and Nasser actually promised that if there is a war and if Syria and Jordan join Egypt, they can actually defeat Israel and destroy the entire Jewish state, remove it from the map, as he would say. Well, 1967 proved to be the exact reverse. That is, Israel struck June of 1967, and the result was Israel became much larger than it was. Why? Because it took what was the West Bank here. It's the West Bank of the Jordan River, including the ancient city of Jerusalem, at least East Jerusalem. It took it from Jordan. In the first Arab-Israeli War of 1948, Jordan had taken over this piece of territory. And it took then this 25-mile strip called the Gaza Strip from Egypt. Gaza Strip was part of Egypt. Jordan ruled the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Israel defeated both. Israel also defeated Syria and took the Golan Heights, and it went all the way into the Sinai Peninsula. At that historical juncture, and that I would make as a jump to the present moment, at that moment, there was some discussion in terms of what the resolution should be. Everybody wants peace, and the Arabs now have been defeated. Maybe they can now accept the existence of a Jewish state called Israel. So the United Nations passed a resolution. It's Resolution 242. It is available actually online. You can see it. It's Land for Peace, basically, formula. And it's very simple. Israel returns the land it has occupied in June 67 war, and the Arab states will recognize the existence of a Jewish state. Well, nobody accepted the 242 resolution, unfortunately. And we went through another war, and that war was 1973, when Egypt, under the leadership of Anwar Sadat, and Syria jointly attacked Israel. And once again, we have another war. But after 73, I think there was a recognition among some Arab governments that this is not going to be a winnable war, that Israel has military superiority. It is now backed by United States. And I say now, because everybody thinks United States supported Israel from day one. That is not actually the fact. Israel was not supported by United States. In 1950s, people tend to forget that in 67, the entire Israeli Air Force was actually armed by Mirage jet fighters bought from France, not from United States. So there is a lot of convolution of facts, of course. But whatever the case may be, in 1970s, you have a situation that for the first time, you had a more pragmatic, a more sane approach to the idea of coexistence. And this allowed, in 1978, for President Carter to initiate the negotiations which came to be known as the Camp David Peace Accords. I'm sure most of you remember that moment. But it was also, we have to always remind ourselves that Egypt, I mean, in this country, thanks to Barbara Walters and the rest of this wonderful media, which I don't want to comment on, but this media actually went into action, turning Anwar Sadat into a man who brought peace to the Middle East single-handedly. And of course, they sort of forgot one little fact, that Egypt was on the verge of collapse in 1977. There were riots on the street. Anwar Sadat and his family were ready to leave Egypt. And the United States jumped in and said, look, we're going to pump $3.5 billion into your economy. We're going to train your army. We're going to keep you in power if you're willing to go and negotiate with Israel. So Egypt and Mr. Sadat were not negotiating for peace out of their good heart. They were actually doing it out of question of survival, political survival. Whatever the case may be, with the Camp David Peace Accords, which was signed in 1978, and then the ceremonial part was in 1979, Egypt and Israel became not allies, not friends, but a lukewarm peace and a cessation of hostilities. And I think since Egypt has been out of the equation, Arab countries cannot attack Israel. That is the only country which could actually lead an invasion of Israel for decades in 1940s, 50s, and 60s was the Egyptian government, which was backed and armed and financed by Moscow. This was within the context of the Cold War. Egypt was really the base for Soviet Union in the Middle East and North Africa. And that Egypt was no longer there in 1978-79. Egypt kicked out all the Soviet trainers, all the Soviet advisors, and became an ally of United States. And as an ally of United States, needless to say, it couldn't have war with another ally of United States, which was the State of Israel. All this to say that we have a situation now that is incredibly confusing. Why? Because those two pieces of territory that has always had a Palestinian Arab majority is now in play again in terms of how to reach a peace agreement between the Arab world and Israel. What is always fascinating to me, I have to admit to this, and I know we are being broadcasted, so I will get a lot of maybe negative response, but the West Bank, right, including East Jerusalem, was part of Jordan from 1948 to 1967, right? It had a Palestinian majority population. Gaza, the 25 strip on the Mediterranean, was part of Egypt between 1948 and 1967. Why wasn't there an attempt to create a Palestinian state when it was run by Jordan and Egypt? Did somebody forget about the Palestinians? Didn't the Palestinians want a state of their own? And why did it become so important to have a Palestinian state when Israel actually took over those two pieces of territory? A question that you probably have a better answer to it than myself. But whatever the case may be, we had a radical change in US foreign policy after decades under the previous administration, Donald Trump administration. Was he brilliantly exposed to the idea of a new foreign policy? No. It was actually because US foreign policy makers, even during President Obama's administration, had recognized something very basic, that the Arab world and Israel were becoming closer and closer without the United States, right? This was a radical transition in the configuration of power. Why were they becoming closer? Because of a giant which was emerging and threatening both of them to the east, namely an Islamic fascistic government in Iran, which was threatening the security of the Arab states, especially in the Persian Gulf area, also Iraq, also Syria, but also Saudi Arabia, the most important Arab country. But Israel felt also very much threatened because the Islamic regime in Iran has been bent on manufacturing nuclear capability. They have not made it very confusing for us not to hear it, though certain people in the State Department have a hard time hearing the news coming from Iran. They want to destroy the Jewish state. They have said it. And they have put on their missiles, on their ballistic missiles in Hebrew, destroy the state of Israel. Well, what is very important for us is that once the Trump administration came to power, they immediately went into action to explore what kind of agreement United States can arrange between the Arab world and the state of Israel. Of course, Donald Trump also went to Saudi Arabia in his first trip, then stopped by Israel on his way back. He was thinking more about the multi-billion-dollar deals, arms deals especially. A little bit of connection with the military-industrial complex was there. But that aside, it was profitable for the United States to sign these kinds of agreements, but also encourage Saudi Arabia and Israel to come together, meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu, who had more or less cut off his ties with the Obama administration, was also revived, encouraging Prime Minister Netanyahu to also engage, sort of Saudi Arabia in these. But at the same time, the Trump administration, following the Obama administration, still maintained direct contact with Mr. Abbas, Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, with the hope that the Palestinian leadership, at least the secular, not Hamas, which was in Gaza, Islamist and terrorist, but the secular, more moderate version of Palestinian nationalist movement would actually join. And the response from the Palestinian Authority was no. We're not going to join any form of discussion about this situation. So the Trump administration turned the table around. And I have to tell you, these three individuals had a lot to do with this now that we have more documents. Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of the president, and a very close friend of the Netanyahu family, when Jared was not at home and Bibi Netanyahu was not the prime minister, whenever he visited the United States, he would stay at Jared's bedroom. I mean, it was that close, basically. And of course, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman. These discussions took place through Lebanese intermediaries and through intermediaries from United Arab Emirates. They were involved in bringing the three parties together. And as a result of this, these Abraham Accords took place during the Trump administration. Now, this is very interesting. The formula was changed. For decades, under both Republican and Democratic administrations, the formula was it should be first Palestinians and Israelis, and then the rest of the Arab world should become involved in these processes. And for the first time, thanks to these intermediaries, they said, let's turn the table around. Let's say Israel would make peace with Arab countries which are willing to make peace, and Palestinians can join the discussion, maybe later if they want. So the Abraham Accords basically opened the door, and the first two countries to recognize the state of Israel and to establish direct ties with the Jewish state proved to be United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. These are two countries in the Persian Gulf region. Why two countries in the Persian Gulf region are coming to the arms of Israel? Because they are neighbors of Iran. This is once again the question of who is the bully in the block and who wants protection. By bringing Israel as an ally into this game, the message to Tehran was, the more you push us, the more we move toward Israel. This was the sort of the formula that was used. And of course, Abraham Accords started with this ceremony in the White House. UAE and Bahrain signed the peace accords with Israel in September 2020. And of course, it was followed by additional agreements between Israel and Morocco, between Israel and Sudan. And this is the most important thing for us to understand, that by mid-October, the plan was that Saudi Arabia would sign and bring itself into the Abraham Accord by signing a permanent peace treaty with the State of Israel. The timing, October 7th, was not accidental. It was a preventive strike by a proxy of Iran, namely Hamas, to prevent the signing of agreement between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Because without the consensus and support of the Saudis, UAE, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, would not have signed that peace agreement. And once they had established peace ties with Israel, Saudi Arabia now felt comfortable to move forward. But a peace agreement between the Arab world led by the richest Arab country, Saudi Arabia, and the State of Israel would have meant only one thing: the end of Iranian hegemony in the region. Iran either had to, it's a chess match. You're about to be checkmated, right? You're about to be isolated. You're about to be outmaneuvered. And suddenly a cat jumps on the table and destroys the chess match. You know what happened? Oh, I don't see where your queen was or your king was. It's gone. It's over. And suddenly, that's exactly what happened on October 7th. The chess match was disrupted. And the hope was that if Hamas attacked Israel, and if, predictably, Israel would retaliate to suppress Hamas, there would be a war, an Arab-Israeli war, and it would make it impossible for the Saudis to sign a peace treaty in the middle of a war with the state of Israel. Very calculating. Who says Persians are stupid? Then we have this new administration, which came, President Biden. President Biden actually, to his credit, continued the discussion based on Abraham Accords. But the posture of the United States in the region changed once again. The posture of the Trump administration was to reconsolidate the old alliances between the United States and its traditional allies. The traditional allies were Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Qatar, Oman, but also Jordan, Egypt, and the rest of the Arab world, as well as Israel. The case of the Biden administration started with a bit of bad news. The posture, and I think now in further analysis, it was a signal basically to those in the Democratic Party which wanted to end certain conflicts at the global level, that look, we're going to withdraw our troops from certain parts of the world to concentrate on China, because China is the new challenge. So one of the places which was, there was even a thought given to it. Why? Because the Obama administration had reduced the troops. Then the Trump administration had continued the reduction. So it was just a natural conclusion to pull out from Afghanistan completely. But we have pullouts and we have pullouts. If you pull out at 3:30 in the morning and your allies are not even notified on the ground in Afghanistan that you are pulling out, and the Afghan troops get up and find out your army is gone and they have no air support, it has a very different impact. There was panic, as you saw, as we all saw it. And the panic turned into really a national catastrophe for Afghanistan, because shortly after the United States pulled out its troops, and look at it, these images, we all remember the Afghans fleeing Afghanistan in tens of thousands. What happened really is that the Taliban, which is an Islamist organization, and incidentally, very close behind the scenes with Hamas, because they share the same ideology of Islamist, Sunni, Muslim Orthodox sort of terrorism, they basically took over the multi-billion-dollar army that the United States had left behind for the Afghan army to defend Afghanistan. And now they are a major military force, because they have tanks and jet fighters and all kind of logistics and so on and so forth. That's one issue. And why was that a problem right away? It was a problem because it provided, or it offered this impression to bullies, Iran first, but also to China and Russia, that the United States is in a retreating mode. It's in a withdrawal mode, right? It is not as interested in the Middle East as in the past. So it is not accidental that you have an invasion of Ukraine. That is, if United States is in a withdrawal mood, United States is not in a mood to confront militarily, we can also make sure that we do our own bidding. China started talking about the possible invasion of Taiwan. Mr. Putin actually invaded Ukraine. Things began to change. Policy two, which also had some negative impact, was we know what happened to Jamal Khashoggi, the brilliant Washington Post journalist, who was murdered. He was not only murdered, he was suffocated, but he was also cut into pieces. His body was cut into pieces by the Saudi secret police. and they threw the pieces of body in various parks in Istanbul, Turkey. And this created an outrage. Even when it took place, which was when the Biden administration was in power. And there was a promise that something has to be done, especially if President Biden comes to the White House. And there was some very harsh rhetoric against the Saudis, that we're coming and we are not going to tolerate this kind of behavior. We're not going to tolerate your abysmal human rights records with regard to political opponents of the regime, with regard to Saudi women, with regard to your journalists. This is outrageous. How much do you think your oil is worth? We have also principles which relates to basic human rights issues. And all these warnings took place when the crisis in Ukraine was hitting the markets. The oil prices went up, the gas prices went up. President Biden, who had attacked Saudi Arabia for its abysmal human rights record, had to rush to Saudi Arabia, more or less, not openly, apologize and say, look, give us more oil and gas. And the Saudis said, not this time. You have embarrassed us and we're not going to do it. So what did the Saudis do? They turned around and they brought the Chinese leadership to Saudi Arabia. Saudis basically were telling Washington, we have more cards to play with. We are not that dependent on Washington anymore. This was one move, and this is very interesting because China immediately jumped into this. China's foreign policy has become increasingly more expansionist and aggressive, and they actually went to Tehran, they went to Saudi Arabia, and they arranged for a peace treaty between Saudi Arabia and Iran, the mortal enemies, right? And the message was, we don't need United States in this region. China can do it. And instead of having a hostile Iran, China can actually bring hostile Iran and make it a friend of Saudis. This is the big Chinese coup d'etat, basically. And they actually turned themselves to a global deal broker. And this is also part of that sort of philosophical foundation of turning this whole balance of power to a new Silk Road, right? China connecting to Central Asia, to Iran, to the Arab world, and so on and so forth. Chinese have a lot of designs on Southwest Asia, but that's not where it stopped. Mohammed bin Salman actually asked for a meeting with Putin, and Russia signed a multi-billion-dollar contract with the Saudis. And in the middle of all this, of course, and this is where we bring us the October 7th, is that we reintroduced another agenda into our foreign policy. Let's negotiate with Iran. We are still, and this I have to say to you, it started actually in 1980s under Reagan administration. Remember the so-called Iran-Contra scandal and so on. What were we doing? We were actually selling arms secretly to the Iranian regime, through Reagan administration. And the profit for the sale of arms were going to fund the Contras in Nicaragua, right? Remember Oliver North and the rest of it. So when President Reagan was asked, why are we selling arms to the Iranians, to the Iranian government? He said, well, there is a moderate faction within the Iranian government. We want to strengthen their hand. We are still looking for these fictional moderates. We cannot find them. Sorry to say this. But this search for moderates have continued from a Republican administration to a Democratic, from a Democratic administration to a Republican administration. And we are still fighting this illusion that Iran, the Iranian government, will act as a normal state and will somehow come and hug us and we kiss each other and say, let's forget and let's ignore all the hostilities. So we started negotiating with Iran, and we wanted to revive the nuclear deal, which President Obama had signed, President Trump had discarded, and we wanted to revive it. And in the middle of all this, of course, we knew something else. Iran was going through its own revolution, its own women-led revolution. Right, hundreds of thousands of Iranians are there. Freedom for women, freedom for the country, down with the Islamic regime, and so on and so on. We sort of ignored all that, believing that the regime will somehow crush the opposition within the country. And what did we do? We had hostages in Iran. We released $6 billion to the Iranians. We got these hostages back. By the way, most of these hostages are Iranian Americans from California who went back to Iran to make money. And they got stuck there. They were kept there as a bargaining chip, basically. The rumor and the joke in Iran is they probably lived in 7-star hotels. They just kept there as a way for Iran to negotiate and get some money. But we did something even more interesting. And that is, we allowed Iran to sell oil and gas once again. Iran had a sanctioned economy under the Bush administration, under the Obama administration, under the Trump administration. They couldn't sell their oil and gas. They were allowed to sell their oil and gas. And we now believe, as of today, Iran has sold $95 billion worth of oil and gas since they was allowed to sell it. So Iran has been flush with money. And the way the Iranian government took this concession was, we have money. United States is not in a posture to attack. They have withdrawn from Afghanistan. They have a horrible relationship with Saudi Arabia. The Biden administration does not like Netanyahu in Israel. Great. Let us actually work on what we want to do, which is consolidate our relationship with China, consolidate our relationship with Russia, and of course, do something else, which is very interesting. Ask the Russians, ask the Chinese, what do you think Iran can do for you? And of course, on the agenda, in the discussions with Putin, was a conflict in the Middle East would help divert the attention from Ukraine, right? Russia is doing very badly in Ukraine, right? So the divert attention would be helpful. And of course, something else, Russia can help by providing sophisticated military technology because, and this is very important, the Russians and the Chinese understand that Iran has been working on creating a ring of fire around Israel. Iran knows that in any conflict with the state of Israel, it does not have the military capability to fight in an open war, right? It has to fight through proxies. It doesn't have an air force. I mean, Israeli air force can destroy what Iran has in a matter of minutes. It doesn't have much of a navy, but it has proxies. Who are these proxies? Proxy one is Hezbollah, the party of God in southern Lebanon. It is actually an arm of Iran's Revolutionary Guards. Let's go there, actually, because this disruption of the peace process has something to do with the fact that there is alliance with Syria, and that alliance with Syria allows Iran to go to Lebanon and train Hezbollah, the party of God. Hezb, party, Allah, Allah. They don't say Hezb, Allah, they say Hezbollah. They connect it. So this party of God, look at them, they are actually trained, they are recruited, they are armed by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. They are an arm of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. They actually have not only Iranian advisors, but Iranian commandos and Iranian commanders who actually lead the Hezbollah. Hezbollah is right north of Israel. They have been armed with the most sophisticated missile system. They can attack Israeli communities, especially in northern Israel. In my last visit to Israel, you were in Haifa, right? Haifa is not on the border, it's north, but the vice president of the university told me, we are ready at any given time to move the campus to Jerusalem or Tel Aviv. You know, this is the kind of fear you create. That is, at any point, if Hezbollah attacks, we cannot sustain our campus. We have to move completely to the south. This is what Hezbollah is there, to terrorize, basically, to create an atmosphere of fear. And this Iran's late Revolutionary Guards is one of the best armies in the Middle East today. Arab armies are not much to sing about, But Iran has always had a very strong military force. And commanders and trainers from Iran's Revolutionary Guards have always been there. So if you see this guy in the middle, Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, going to Tehran, receiving briefcases filled with cash, not only from Mr. Khamenei, who is the supreme leader of Iran, but the deceased, the person who was actually killed by a drone attack ordered by President Trump, Qasem Soleimani, it's because Hassan Nasrallah considers himself as a servant, as an agent of Iran. Look at this. This is, I mean, the relationship is a sort of a boss, and it's a bit of a mafia. You know, it's a godfather, and with all the hitman basically sitting there. So Hassan Nasrallah, as he said a few months ago, he said, and I apologize in advance, it's using his language. He said, from our underwear to our most sophisticated missile systems, all provided by Iran. We cannot have an existence without Iran. But the second part of the Ring of Fire is the Hamas itself. And this is, of course, Ismail Haniyeh, right? The civilian leader of Hamas. These guys, by the way, as all of you know, they do not live in Gaza. They do not fight. They do not participate in any fighting. They are living in very posh hotels, you know, some of them 7-star in Qatar or Turkey. They have construction projects in Turkey. He's a regular visitor to Iran, and here is a visit with Khamenei. And it's very interesting for us to understand that on one occasion, they would tell you that they were leaving Iran, and suddenly they were told, no, 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 you cannot leave. There's something coming for you. And they're waiting, what is coming? And suddenly they see these duffel bags, right? Duffel bags. And they unzip the duffel bag, and it's just cash. They said 1 duffel bag, 2nd duffel bag, 3rd duffel bag. 7 duffel bags came. And they were counting, he said about $21 million in cash. They were being given at the airport in Tehran. And the pilot is going and looking at this. I can't lift all this. The plane cannot lift. Send the next plane with more duffel bags. But for now, we take 7. This is how open and how public. Why I say this? Because in the days after October 7th, the White House and the State Department had a hard time saying Hamas is funded by Iran, is armed by Iran, is trained by Iran. Come on. I mean, go on YouTube, you click, and the Hamas leader is talking about the duffel bags. It's not a big secret. Whatever the case may be, they go regularly to Tehran. They receive training. They receive arms. They live in Qatar, or until recently at least, they lived in Qatar. But Iran is the big backer. Our estimate that Iran has provided $350 million to Hamas in more recent times. Qatar has provided also something around $180 million. To be a terrorist and to lead a terrorist organization is a very profitable venture in the Middle East these days. So $360 million is quite a bit of money. And what is the purpose of this is that you have Gaza. As most of you know, Gaza, there is no geographical boundary separating it from the state of Israel. You have to use Gaza as a base to attack Israel. And that's part of this ring of fire, basically. You have 25 miles of basically a military zone from which you can fire at Israel at will. So Iran has basically created an access by alliance with Syria, by arming Hezbollah in Lebanon, by arming Hamas in Gaza Strip. And this, you know, one cartoon can says a lot of truth about it. Here is Iran, here is Hamas, here is Hezbollah. But more recently, Iran has added one more player to the equation. They went to Yemen and they used the chaos of Yemen. The Iranian regime acts like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They look for failed states. Yemen was a failed state. There was a civil war. Yemen has a large population of Shia Muslims. Iranians are predominantly Shia. Yemenis are fellow Shia, though they're Arabs and these guys are Persians. Nevertheless, they share a common religion. The form of Shiism in Yemen is Zaidi, is 4 imams, whereas the Iranians are 12 imams. You know, there is a bit of difference between them in religion. But Yemen is a very poor country. And the Houthis, this coalition of Yemeni Shia tribal groups, was in desperate need for arms, for money, for training, and Iran immediately put the money. And in return, you would reciprocate. How? You reciprocate by disrupting the trade and the commercial shipping on the Red Sea. And of course, that's what Houthis have done. Now, Iran is also firing ballistic missiles from Yemen in the direction of Israel. So the ring of fire has been completed now. To the north, Hezbollah. To the west, Hamas. To the south, the Houthis in Yemen. And to the east, immediate east, of course, Syria, where the Iranian armed forces has about 13 military bases, very close to the Golan Heights, near Israel. That's why Israel is constantly attacking these bases in order to make sure Iran gets the message that if you use these bases to attack Israel, there will be repercussions. So, concluding, and I know you have questions and I don't want to talk too much, Israel is right now militarily surrounded by the proxies of Iran. And in this game, Gaza Strip plays a very important role because it is the base for Hamas. Look, this is not a large country. I don't need to tell you. I put this map in order to give you a sense of how small it is. We were driving toward northern Israel, and our marvelous friend sort of had a map of Israel, and he took his pen out and he said, "This is map of Israel, Mehrdad. This is how wide it is. That is how narrow it is, basically. From the West Bank to the sea, this is how narrow it is. It can be cut off so easily. That's why we are crazy about our security. And that's why Hezbollah, Hamas, and Houthis are so frightening to the state of Israel." I already talked about the partition plan of 1947. Today, that partition plan is useless. The demography has changed, has shifted completely. The wars that has happened has shaped the political and geographical configuration. And I think the 67 war is still with us in some ways in terms of how the land was divided. But the question is what to do and how do you bring peace? Let me finish with this. I am very pessimistic because I don't see any exit strategy right now, which is doable. Why? Because in an ideal terms, you want peace. You want peaceful coexistence between two people. You want the end of the war. You want Israeli hostages to be back. You want the suffering of the Palestinian people to disappear. You want the two people to live together next door in recognition and peace. But when the Gaza Strip is ruled by a terrorist organization which wants your destruction, when the West Bank is now moving more and more to the orbit of Hamas, the latest, even from Palestinian media, you have 70 to 75% of Palestinians who support Hamas against Palestinian Authority, which is the more secular version of Palestinian leadership. It is almost nearly impossible to conceive to sit down with people who want your destruction and negotiate it. It is impossible. And Israel would not do this. Israel would not do it for other reasons. We are now in a sort of a clash course between the Israeli government and the Biden administration. The Biden administration has to deal with an election year. The White House's priority is to somehow contain this conflict and to end it, in fact, and for this conflict not to spill over into neighboring countries. And that's why it has taken a very appeasing approach toward Iran. It does not want the conflict to erupt into the Persian Gulf area, into the Red Sea area. So it wants to keep things quiet until November and then maybe change the gear. So the Biden administration is constantly pressuring Israel to negotiate, to end the conflict, to end the military operations. On the other hand, inside Israel, you have a prime minister who believes that if he ends the conflict today, and if he ends military operations tomorrow, he will be pushed out of power, because the majority of Israelis are insisting that we do not want an Israel under the gun. We want to make sure that you get rid of Hamas and you finish the terrorists, you end the terrorist threat to the existence of a Jewish state. Netanyahu is going this way, the Biden administration is going that way. They are not meeting halfway in terms of understanding that there might be a place to meet. There is another issue, and that is the Israeli government is very irritated, and it comes out over and over, with the fact that the United States is not confronting Iran, and it's still negotiating privately. We attacked, as you know, just last week, 10 days ago, Houthi targets, off Yemeni coast and in the Red Sea, right? And what did we do before we attacked Houthis in Yemen? We actually called Iran and we said, we are coming to attack the Houthis. Please remove your ships and battleships from Yemeni ports because we don't want to hit you. That's how worried the Biden administration is about escalating the conflict between itself and Iran. And Iran has read it. And as long as our approach is so cautious, of course, the Iranians said, let's continue the attacks. The Houthis just today fired more missiles against Israel, attacked more ships on the Red Sea, and so on and so forth. This will continue. Hezbollah has also increased its attacks against the state of Israel. And Hamas, as of today, was still shooting missiles. Under these circumstances, if the state of Israel goes and negotiate, if it finds a negotiating partner, it will be negotiating with somebody that wants its destruction, which makes no sense politically to the people who run the Israeli government. So we are in a conflict which, I'm sorry, and I want to apologize in advance as I finish my remarks, but we are in a situation that will continue for months, if not years, because we do not have parties which can find a peaceful resolution to their interest. Such a peaceful resolution is out of question right now as I stand in front of you. Thank you very much for your patience, and sorry for that very depressing conclusion.
To answer some questions. Great. Who has the question?
We should go home. Yes, please.
So, as we move more and more towards the primaries and see what happens, and I'm just giving a hypothesis here.
Yeah, please.
If it looks like Trump might get nominated and looks like it's going to be, like we don't know where the election's going to go, wouldn't it be in Iran's best interest to negotiate with Biden, because they don't know what Trump's going to do? That he might actually create more chaos than he already does?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be in their best interest?
That's a great question, but if I pretend that I know the answer, I would be lying to you. So why? Because, first of all, just...
And I bring that up because,
Yeah, I know.
during the Iran-Contra hostage, Herb Cohn, in one of his books about negotiation, mentions that as soon as Carter lost to Reagan, that they negotiated with Carter to release the hostages because they were afraid of Reagan.
Yes.
That's, I'm making that connection from
Yes.
40-something years ago.
But the Iranians, remember, going back to 1980s, I don't want to rehash the history, but the Iranians actually held the hostages until Ronald Reagan won the election.
Right, that's
And they released them to the Reagan administration rather than to the Carter administration.
right, and that was Herb Cohn in one of his
Yeah.
books. He I don't know if you know who he is.
Yeah.
But he was on the negotiating team with Carter, quit because he didn't respect Carter.
Right.
And he said he knew when Iran was going to
Yeah.
release. And I'm just wondering, and I'm just bringing that
Yeah.
as an analogy
Yeah.
to.
The Iranians basically, look, I mean, the reason they had such a negative view of President Carter was they were convinced that it was Carter administration which had encouraged Saddam Hussein to invade Iran in 1980. So they were getting back at President Carter by holding the hostages until he loses election, and then they would release it to Ronald Reagan in return for arms and spare parts. I mean, that's how the formula apparently went. But whatever the case may be, coming to the present moment, Iran is going through a very, very tumultuous moment in its history. You have a population, last time I had a presentation, I think Mona and Ruth were both there. You have two Irans. You have the Iran of the people of Iran. You saw them on the streets. We just had, in the last 2 days, about 12 Iranian opponents of the regime executed. It is massive, massive repression inside Iran. Jails are full. Intellectuals, journalists, writers, professors. People are fired left and right. And not just intellectuals, physicians, nurses, It's mind-boggling in terms of how harsh and brutal the repression is. The end, as Iranians would say, is coming. But with this level of repression, we don't know how long this end is coming because people have been promising an end to this regime, but it's not coming very soon, apparently. Whatever the case may be, you have that Iran, which the regime constantly has to watch because it's right there in front of it. Then you have an Iran which wants to bully and act as a global power, regional power, and so on, global power, regional power, and so on and so forth. And all of these is part of putting Israel on the defensive, putting United States on the defensive, and project power, right? That we have crushed the opposition inside Iran, we are in total control, and we are in such control that we can actually go beyond our borders and flex our muscles, and nobody can do anything about it. This is, the sort of projection that the Iranian government is doing. But whatever that may be, I think right now, Iran basically is reading Washington as, let's not get involved into a face-to-face confrontation, and let us just avoid a confrontation. The Iranians, unfortunately, I have to say this, the Iranian government, not the Iranian people, but the Iranian government, unfortunately only understands the language of power. Here, during the Trump administration, they kept on attacking Saudi oil refineries. They shot down a US drone over the Persian Gulf and so on and so forth. And then nothing, no response, no response, no response. And then in January 2020, boom, Qasem Soleimani was hit as he had landed in Iraq. With one drone attack, United States destroyed the leadership of part of the Iran's Revolutionary Guards. For 11 months, no terrorism. The message to Iran was, watch out, you're coming after your leadership. And then the voice from the White House said, look, we started with Soleimani, but we can finish with Khamenei himself. Don't do this. And suddenly, Iran became very polite, very, very attentive to sort of say, see, this is the kind of regime you're dealing with. I understand that there are people like Robert Malley, look him up, the chief negotiator. Can you imagine? Robert Malley was the chief negotiator on behalf of the Biden administration. I heard him in first-person language said, well, the Iranian government is an anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, popular movement. We cannot just go and, come on. Where in Johns Hopkins seminar room did you learn these things? Really? Really? That PhD is worth anything? I mean, reality, Robert, maybe? And you know what has happened now? Robert Malley was removed. You know why he was removed? Because he recruited a bunch of Iranians, right, to his office. And all of these Iranians, FBI and CIA found out, were in direct contact with the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, sharing documents from United States government with the Iranian government. They had penetrated Robert Malley's office. So Robert now is off the governmental payroll, and he's going to teach at Yale. That's very interesting also situation. But here is the situation. We have certain people in both administrations, both Republican and Democrat, but more in this administration, I think, who really believe that Iran can become a normal state. Well, we have been waiting for that normalization for 45 years, no results. So as long as this is the kind of approach, I don't think we will see any change. And I think you will see more aggressive behavior on the part of Iran. What will happen, and don't hold your breath as if Trump wins the election, things will change, they become rosy. Not really. The Trump administration and President Trump himself, he said, I'm a good businessman. I'm going to go and negotiate with the Iranians and bring them to the, good luck. This is not New Jersey or New York. This is Tehran, Iran. The statements made by President Trump, is really, really at times embarrassing, right? It's just lack of understanding of diplomacy. So, look, I'm very critical of both. I apologize again. But I have to be honest and truthful to all of you. Yes, please.
Can you speak a little more about Saudi Arabia in that you talked about how they were forming alliances with Russia and China, yet they were prepared to work with the Biden administration and sign a peace deal, or at least a recognition of Israel.
Yeah.
Can you speak more about that?
Yeah, that's an outstanding question. So I think what we are seeing is right in front of us, especially after October 7th, but even before the conflict erupted between Hamas and Israel, a whole new political configuration. And I do not want to overemphasize it, but the role of the United States in this process of transitioning is enormous, is central. Why? Because a lot of regional players adjust themselves, right, to the moves from Washington. If they feel there is a strong US backing, and not only militarily and in terms of security, but economic assurances, trade assurances, commercial assurances, diplomatic support, they have a very different posture. They immediately move toward the United States orbit. When they feel that the United States is abandoning the region, as the withdrawal from Afghanistan send that kind of message, attacking or criticizing the Saudi monarchy. By the way, I have to tell you, I have been one of the biggest critics of the Saudi monarchy. I feel that it's one of the most backward regimes in the world. And its human rights record is abysmal and embarrassing, just for my own personal opinion. At the same time, you do not share your feelings in front of microphones if you want to criticize the Saudis and cause an embarrassment for them, because they're very sensitive about their image. That kind of language is used in private meetings. You need to improve your human rights records. You have to release all the female activists and human rights activists in your jails. You have to provide women with equal rights, if you can ever conceive of that, of course, which is another challenge, and so on and so forth. Look, it's a Wahhabi Islamist fundamentalist regime with an abysmal record on many fronts. But it's a rich country, and it's a very powerful country, and it influences the entire Arab world. You hate them, but you need them. This is the reality of Saudi Arabia right now. So the moment they felt that the United States was abandoning them, They immediately, and they feel very threatened by Iran. They know Iranian military, Iranian history, culture. This is called Persian Gulf. It was their Gulf, right? They ran this show. They had a Persian Empire for centuries and so on. If United States is not there, they have to guarantee their security by other forms of alliances. They cannot be alone face to face with Iran. Iran is the bully and the giant in the region. Iran wants to act like India of the Middle East, like the China of the Middle East, like the superior power, like the global power, like the hegemonic power, the best way to put it, that it wants to portray itself. With that in mind, when you're facing that kind of power and that kind of threat, and remember, if you look at the map, Yemen and the Houthis are just south of Saudi Arabia. So Houthis cannot just attack Israel, they have been attacking Saudi Arabia as well. So the Saudis feel also there is a ring of fire around them too by the Iranians. All that, they look at the United States when Trump goes there, they throw a big, red carpet for him, bravo, and in return for the favor of coming back and reconsolidating the relationship with the Saudis, you get $120 billion arms deal. It's a payment of a bribe for security and protection, right? And now they're looking for allies that would protect them. Putin has come, China has come, but deep down, this is a highly, highly, highly conservative monarchy. It feels very uncomfortable with the Russians. It feels very uncomfortable with the Chinese. Deep down, they want to be an ally of the West and especially the United States. So there is always that opportunity to go back and reformulate, reorganize the relationship. And I think that's what would happen in the coming months. We need the Saudis because of energy. They need us for security and protection. And I think that's the formula that is now in play. And United States has used that as a way of encouraging the Saudis now to go back to the negotiation table with Israel, regardless of what's happening to Hamas and in Gaza. That is, eventually, you have to have peace. Are you willing to do it? And to my surprise, I have to admit this, the Saudis have said, yes, we're going to restart it, which is good news, actually, because that isolates Hamas. That takes away that bite that the Iranians and Hamas thought they were bringing to this game. That if we disrupt, it's going to become a permanent disruption. It has proved to be a very short-term disruption, at least for now. Somebody had a hand. Nat, yeah. And please. Yeah, please. Go ahead.
Thanks for the fantastic explanation.
Thank you very much.
Could you elaborate on China's motivation to broker a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have this sense, in our last trip to China, we were hosted by a group of foreign policy analysts, most of them former, their version of State Department and also ambassadors, basically. And what you really have in the case of China is China wants to use as much as possible soft power, right? Soft power and avoiding an image that it's a mighty military, empire. So what is soft power? Soft power is diplomacy, soft power is commerce, investment. Chinese companies can provide heavy investment, much cheaper goods, of course, in the end, and build highways, pipelines, infrastructure that some of these countries in the Middle East need badly. They are now in Afghanistan. They are investing in Afghanistan. There is a vacuum. They even go and work with Taliban if you need to, basically. So it's a business opportunity. But in the process, they also understand that the Arab world in particular, what is it, 350 million people, is a huge market for Chinese goods. They have already come to dominate African markets, and now they're moving to North African and Middle Eastern markets. Saudi Arabia is a huge market. They just signed a $4 billion trade agreement with Saudi Arabia. They are also building some railways and railroads, basically, for Saudis, bringing some more factories, consumer goods, and so on and so forth. The result is, the rate of interaction between China and Saudi Arabia has increased significantly. Whether China is willing to go beyond that and make itself committed militarily and in terms of security, that is, provide what the United States has been providing, I doubt it. The Chinese are not there yet. And traditionally, their focus has been on North Korea and South Korea, the Korean peninsula. That worries them a great deal. Their focus is, of course, on Taiwan, which is huge. Their worry is also to some degree on Vietnam, because Vietnam is a rising power, is an economic power. There has always been a problematic relationship between Vietnam and China, going back even to Vietnam War. So all that, the periphery of China seems to be far more important. But that doesn't mean that China is not expanding westward. It was fascinating in a trip to Central Asia. We were in Republic of Tajikistan, and we were told that the Tajiks had, magnificent, beautiful country, very mountainous, but they couldn't go from southern part of the country to northern part of the country because it's so mountainous. They had to go through neighboring Uzbekistan in order to go to northern Tajikistan. So here comes Iran building a massive highway for them. And who does the Iranians bring? China, in order to help them finish it. So I decided, we need to see this highway, because it was just incredible. This massive project, multi-billion-dollar. Iranians are Persian speakers. Tajiks are also Persian speakers. This is brotherly gift, of influence and so on and so forth. And I said, where are the Iranian engineers? They said, oh, they go home at 5. But they're still working on the tunnels. And we went through this tunnel. This tunnel is 20 miles long, it's just in the mountain, basically. And there are thousands of Chinese putting light on the top of the tunnel, right? And the Iranians have to go to their hotels, take a shower, and there are thousands of Chinese living in a tent next to the tunnel, and they're working at 8 in the evening. That gives you a sense of how fast China is moving to Central Asia and Middle East. So, but it's all diplomacy, commerce, and investment rather than military engagement right now.
I think we have time for maybe a couple more. So
Yeah.
So there's a question from someone who's been on Zoom, and then Rabbi Kula. You're next.
Yeah, please.
And, okay, so
Richard, go ahead.
Thank you for your interesting remarks. Get closer. But I'm wondering, it appears that meanwhile the Palestinians fall into control here. What do you see as the future for the Palestinian people?
Thank you very much for this question. The question, to repeat it, is what do you see as the future of the Palestinian people? I have to tell you, because I grew up having many Israeli friends and some Palestinian friends, and I know how agonizing this history has been. And I think it will become even more agonizing in the coming months. The reason is the following. Is the best and the most direct way, I would say, is I think the Palestinian people are now pawns in a game. And this game is a game, very brutal game, that Hamas is playing. And this game is very simple. Build a city and infrastructure underneath the ground, receive billions of dollars from Iran, Qatar, and other places, and create a military camp, basically. And when one of the Palestinian leaders was asked by a BBC reporter, why did you receive all these billions of dollars, but we don't see Hamas building any hospitals, any schools, any infrastructure, any roads, any highways? Create jobs, because 2.5 million Palestinians in Gaza. And I have to tell you, Palestinians are some of the most educated Arabs in the world. You know, one of the highest levels of literacy among the Palestinians. Look at Palestinian, excuse me, intellectuals in this country. And the answer from the Hamas leader was that the people of Gaza are the responsibility of Israel and United Nations, not us. We are a military organization, and our purpose is something totally different from providing services. Our purpose is to fight the state of Israel to its destruction. Look, it's very direct. You know, it's on Western media. When you have that kind of leadership, I'm sorry, the future looks very bleak for the Palestinians, at least for now. There have been opportunities for the Palestinians in the past. I think the 47, again, United Nations partition plan, 67, land for peace formula, Camp David itself. Then the negotiations that took place during President Clinton's administration, which really, the Oslo Agreement, was something that became the closest, with Prime Minister Rabin and Chairman Arafat shaking hands in the White House. These were very close moments to the peace that we all want. But all these opportunities were missed. And I have to tell you, based on what I have read from the documents, it's the failure of the Palestinian leadership to take the jump and say, no to war, no to conflict, let's go sit down. This land needs to be shared rather than to be ruled just by us. And as long as you have a dream of attacking and destroying the state of Israel, I don't think Israel would allow it to happen. And I think the fate of the Palestinian people is, unfortunately, in the hands of the people who are not thinking about their own people and their future. Rabbi, yeah, he had to go. All right.
Question was, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you heard it.
I didn't.
But what do you think Israel's strategy should be moving forward?
Well, I do not pretend that I know the answer to that question. First of all, and I say this with just direct understanding of what I have seen, Israel is a democracy, which by definition means that it doesn't have just one opinion. And we know the famous saying, 2 Israelis, 3 opinions, you know. And, you know, you have a situation, it's a multi-party democracy. There is no consensus in this political situation about what the strategy should be. IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces itself, its command structure is also very divided in terms of what to do. I know that the majority of Israeli leadership know that Israel does not want to stay in Gaza permanently and rule Gaza. That is very clear. But what to do with Gaza is very, very difficult to predict. The other issue, which is very important for us to also understand, is that you might be able to defeat Hamas militarily. The question is how to defeat that ideology, that idea, the idea that we need a Palestinian state based on the teaching of the Quran and the Sharia, the Islamic legal code, which takes us back to 7th century AD. And you have a justice system where homosexuals are thrown off the roof as punishment. Women are prohibited from dressing the way they want. Children are taught that Jews were born out of an evil race. And on, I can just go on over the list. That ideology is ideology of hate, and that ideology will not produce anything but conflict and warfare. So that's why I say we are stuck. The Palestinian people, and I'm not here to suggest any alternative, but the Palestinian people should abandon this kind of leadership, if I had any say in this, and formulate a new strategy which is based on coexistence, peaceful coexistence, and recognition, and mutual recognition of both peoples living in peace and security. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you very much.